Hi there, welcome to my No BS Gear Review channel. Tonight we're looking at a knife that I bought because many people commented how Bestech does an excellent job heat treating MagnaCut. It arrives in a very simplistic box, no fancy packaging, no stickers, none of the nonsense that I actually object to quite a bit. What absolutely shocked me is how premium this knife felt to me for just $100 that I paid for it. I even like that natural G10, which I don't normally favor. This knife feels totally dialed in, and what's even better, ergonomically, it feels like a Becker BK40, which is probably one of the best ergonomic folder knives out there. And I brought in Lander 2 because that one also has a very crisp action. Definitely it's more ergonomic than these two knives with the same length blade, which is Spyderco Military 2 and Benchmade 710, but much less expensive. The action on it, I wish it had more than one way to deploy it. It's a flipper knife and there's no other easy way to deploy the blade. The blade length is 3 15/16 of an inch or 98 millimeters. And the cutting edge only adds about a 1/16 of an inch because the belly is not too pronounced. It's a very stabby, slim blade, 99 millimeters here. Before I throw it on the scale, let's measure the practical edge length, which is what I call the length of the blade still in use when the knuckle of my finger hits the cutting board. And here I get about 1.5 inches, which is below half the blade, so not particularly great. And it was a flipper tab that hit the cutting board before my knuckles. It weighs 138 grams or 4.8 ounces. And for this blade size, it's actually a pretty reasonably weighted knife. And here I'm making my feeble attempts to find a secondary means to deploy the blade. And I almost kind of did it, but it was kind of mostly one-off. The word pocket is a keyword in the phrase pocket knife. And so pocket clip is critical to whether or not you're going to keep your knife in the pocket or leave it at home in your tool drawer. Here I'm wearing full thickness pair of jeans with the pocket seam roughly at 1/8 of an inch. And this device on my ED center emulates the pocket because the webbing is about the same thickness. So I am getting a very reasonable pocket insertion force as well as the extraction force, so it would be easy to put it in and take it out of the pocket. Yeah, very consistent too. I'm getting right around 2 pounds on insertion and 2.5 on extraction, but let's see if such a heavy knife will slide out of your pocket in some kind of shock situation where maybe you are in a car accident or tumbling down the slope on your hike. And as you can see, even with a heavy weight and a light pocket clip, it works just fine. And here I'm testing the flipper tab deployment force, and I think that is important because the more force you have to apply to deploy the blade, within reason, of course, the crispier it will feel. So it's very hard to evaluate how crispy it feels other than doing what I'm doing. And it snaps open at slightly over 3 pounds, which gives me a very satisfying and premium feeling. And what I'm doing here is I'm clamping it into a piece from my TS Prof sharpening device. I put this clamp to sort of limit access to the cutting edge so that I can consistently measure exactly behind the cutting edge thickness. And what I'm getting here is about 18.5, 19 thousandths of an inch. That is a little more than I expected just looking at the knife, but that's why we do measurements, so we know for sure. Let's try it again. Yep, we're gonna call it 18 on average, 18 thousandths of an inch. And since we're on the topic of the edge, let's check it out under the microscope, starting with the tip. To me, Tip is evidence of how professional the person who sharpened the knife is, and there's absolutely no way to describe this tip other than perfect. And the dirt on the blade is explained by the fact that I couldn't resist carrying it a couple days last week. So now we will check out the sharpening choil, or specifically where the primary grind's plunge line intersects with the secondary bevel. And as you can see, we are on the cusp of encroaching, even though the shark fin has not started forming yet. The other side looks pretty symmetrical, and the secondary bevel width remains consistent throughout the length of the blade, which is evidence of a consistent sharpening angle. Don't worry, this is not a Star Wars battle droid, nor is it a killer robot holding V sign up on its right hand. This here is a device provided to me by a viewer. He designed the device that converts a Newton meter, or as we call it here in America, a trigger gauge, into a BESS style filament cut test. In case you never measured trigger pull force, as you can see, the subject is safe and secured, and I'm using the same trigger gauge. And the first pull gives me 3.45 pounds. And in grams, it is 1565. I have not tested BESS myself, and so I cannot tell you anything about how accurate or inaccurate they are. Hopefully somebody will send me one of those devices for evaluation. Here's a spool that has this filament or fishing line. It goes in. I can then tighten this thumb nut and wrap it around a specially designed washer that has a little stop. After I reviewed another knife on my channel, the designer told me that I was over tightening the filament. As you can see, there's a little give, and that gives the most accurate results. Or let's just say consistent results. So let's test our subject knife. I'm speeding up this segment, but it still leaves me enough time to thank the new channel members and subscribers. 213 grams. Also, many thanks to those of you who so generously contributed via the super thanks. 220 grams on this trial. Everyone is welcome to comment, except if you're going to use bad language or post external links of any kind. 250 grams on this last cut for the average of 228 grams. I use this antler here, as in the previous test, to dull the blade, and I make 10 passes in each direction for a total of 20, and then remeasure the sharpness again to see the percent of sharpness decrease. This is definitely not an industry standard test such as Katra, but I believe finding the average decrease in sharpness gives you a point of reference. 290 grams of force on the first cut. I don't know if you noticed, but I am moving the blade 1/8 of an inch forward between the cuts. 286 grams this time. And the reason I advance the blade between the cuts is to make sure I don't hit the same spot, because I simply don't know if that spot would be a peak or valley on the striation. The edges are not smooth. 287 grams for this cut, and my average is 288 grams. Pretty consistent if you ask me. 26% reduction in sharpness. In my humble opinion, this test represents the 3 pillars of sharpness: wear resistance of the steel at this heat treat level, the apex stability, or how well the secondary bevel geometry protects the apex from rolling, and the toughness of the edge, or how well it resists chipping when encountering naturally hard materials. All of which is just a part of evaluating the overall performance of any knife as a system. And my further tests are designed to do just that. I call them torture tests, but they're sort of emulating the real life situations, even though some people disagree with that statement. For example, the spine whack test, which I perfected using this hype smasher, allows me to clamp the knife in a device that emulates a human grip, at least in my non-medical opinion. I do not set the knife rigidly in. There's a little bit of flex because it sits on top of the steel rods clad in rubber hose material. I think it's pretty close to the skeletal structure of your fingers. And, you know, it's not clamped dead bolted into the wooden block here. So if you were to work on something in the real world and accidentally struck an obstacle with the spine of the blade, I am trying to determine whether or not that strike would unlock the lock of the blade, causing it to strike your fingers, producing a severe injury, as it happened to several of my viewers who contributed their comments in some other videos. I hope these guys will come back and contribute again, because every time I do this test I get these comments from folks that watch standard knife reviewers who in turn decry this test as stupid. To a lot of people, perception is reality. To a lot of my viewers, reality is shit happens. The Hype Smasher is a modified arbor press. Its throat is 6 inches. That is the free fall distance of the ram, which in turn weighs 2.5 pounds. And it strikes the blade approximately 2¼ inches from the pivot. This is a liner lock knife, and there are sort of rumors circulating that somehow these locks don't hold up in a spine whack situation. I disagree. I believe if your grip is proper, it will not unlock, as you just saw here. Time to take the knife out and inspect it for damage. And what I usually look for is deformation to the locking face, any cracks in the spring relief cut, and any free play of the blade, which this knife developed none of the above. Next, I check the lock functionality. It locks, it flicks as before. Definitely a solid piece of cutlery engineering here. This is my strain resistant tests. First thing I do, I insert the knife approximately 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch into this solid oak clamp or wood block clamp, and then bend it 15 degrees. This test actually exceeds military standard for testing bladed weapons. They require 9-degree bending of the blade, and what we're looking for is permanent deformation, or what engineers call plastic deformation, after the test. Next, I'm going to apply as much of the twisting moment to the blade. That creates an exuberant amount of strain on the internal components, such as pivot hardware, screws, pins, etc. And now I will inspect the knife again. As you can see, it was stuck there pretty hard. I don't see any bending with my naked eye. The function remains good, excellent as a matter of fact, and there's no vertical play or horizontal play that opened up. Again, this knife shows just how solid some of the reasonably priced blades can be, and nothing comes close to liner lock action as far as how crisp is the deployment. The blade remains centered, and next I'm going to put it on the steel block, on a flat block, to see if there was any bending. Let's verify that there is no permanent deformation to the blade's tip. Nothing on this side. Let's see the other side. And Do I have? Nope. Straight as a ruler. And now let's take the Rockwell hardness of this blade. I start the stopwatch so that you can see this segment is uninterrupted and unedited. I will recalibrate or verify calibration of my device after I test the blade. I use incompressible liquid. In this case, it's a sanitizing gel. A recent video by Outdoors55 showed that there is no difference between using a gel like this or some sort of oil. He got the same consistency out of this device. While his video was very informative and factual, there are a couple discrepancies from the methodology that I use. And when I get my benchtop Rockwell tester, so 62.9 is average for this side. Anyway, when I get my Rockwell hardness tester and kind of get my feet wet using it, I will do a video comparing the two. The purpose for me here is not to prove myself right or anybody else wrong. The purpose here is to create a methodology for anyone who is able to afford a $150 to $250 device to test their own blade, not for sort of quality control purposes, for their own knowledge at home. As you can see, this device takes 5 measurements per side and then calculates average for each side. Then I average the two sides, and that's my final result. And now I am going to verify calibration of my test block. And I set the device to measure as it was cast steel. The reason is because it is cast steel. When I test the blade, I tested under tool steel. So the block is calibrated to 787 points on Leeb scale, and I got 794. So I have a zero shift of 7 points. That equates to roughly half HRC, which brings the corrected average for the blade down to 62.5. Precisely as it measured in the previous video. So you can probably deduce that I actually like this knife quite a bit. It's such a pleasure to actually find a good value proposition with a premium steel on the blade, a beautifully constructed handle, and a very reasonable price. Now, do not expect a link to this knife. I do not sell knives on my channel. I very seldomly accept gifts from companies to review them, and I make sure that the company watches my videos of other knives before they commit to sending me one, because I give knives pretty tough reviews.